If you take a seat, please. Get comfortable. We have a fantastic program for you, as we have every year for the past, I don't know how many years, but I know that it's always been the place where January gets lighter and brighter and gives us hope for the future, for the improvement of our world and our relationships with each other. And I remember for years I've started by saying we probably need this now more than ever. And unfortunately, I can say that again. I think we need this now more than ever. We need the legacy of Dr. King, and we need the inspiration of the young people you will see and hear from today, and the incredible events that are occurring in our community to honor a significant portion of our history that has been put on the shelf for far too long. So we really look forward to sharing this program with you this afternoon. And then after Reverend Mency, there will be a reception outside in the lobby, and you're all welcome to stay. I would ask you all now to please stand and join in singing our national anthem and our national African American national anthem. We belong to both. Words will be up here.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let us resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you. Please be seated. And we want to thank Shalisha Kerr and Basil and all of you for joining in and singing. Now, I got to tell all y'all something. Dr. Klauber, who many of you know, he's been our president here for 5 years. He couldn't be here today because he's down in downtown Hagerstown interviewing candidates for the USMH, which is, let's face it, the second best higher education institution in the area, HCC being the first. So anyway, it's my pleasure to stand in momentarily for Dr. Klauber and introduce all y'all to our favorite, outstanding, wonderful academic vice president, academic and student services vice president, Dr. Warner. Please welcome Dr. Dave Warner.
Good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. On behalf of Dr. James Klauber, president of HCC, we welcome our students, faculty, and staff, and welcome to our visitors from the community. Welcome also to our presenters and performers today. Thank you for being with us and sharing your talent, wisdom, and experience with us. Thank you to the organizers of this event and to all the participants. And welcome Washington County Commissioner Jeff Klein. These annual celebrations of Dr. King's legacy are important, not simply to reflect on the life and work of a great man who led a movement that moved this nation forward exponentially, and not only to remember Dr. King and the civil rights movement for the work that was accomplished in the fight against segregation, poverty, and war, and not just to memorialize a man of God who 54 years ago was killed for what he stood for. These are all just reasons to come together every year on or near Dr. King's birthday. But the real reason we are here today is that the work that was begun in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s is not yet done. Disparities still exist between our African American, Latino, and white brothers and sisters in terms of education levels, poverty levels, and opportunity levels. And disparities still exist and continue to grow between the poor and the wealthy in our country, regardless of race. Equality of civil and economic rights has not yet been achieved for all Americans. And acts of anti-Black, anti-immigrant, and anti-Semitic aggression have increased dramatically over the last few years. That is why we are here today, because the work of Dr. King and the other great leaders of the civil rights movement is not yet done. In the last major speech that Dr. King gave on April 3rd, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, the night before he was assassinated, he implored his followers with the following: "Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation." At this time each year, we reflect, we remember, and we recommit to continue Dr. King's work, and as he challenged us to do our part to make America a better nation. Welcome, and thank you very much.
Okay. Jim's gone, Mike's back. Feels good to be back. And now we begin with well, I do want to welcome people who are watching us on live streaming. Hopefully there are tens of thousands of people taking advantage of this great day. And we'd like to welcome you and hope you enjoy the program. And we now have a video reflection. Thank you. And there's nothing better than live streaming and live events. We had a change in the program, and I'm going to introduce one of our fantastic HCC students who is earning her nursing degree, and she's going to be reading from her own written work, describing the intersection of community and the individual in order to form a more perfect, as Dr. King would say, beloved community. So please join me in welcoming Larissa Fra Benue. Larissa.
Where my umbilical cord is buried. Mente is a close-knit community located in the northwest part of the Republic of Cameroon, a country located in Central Africa. Hugging two hills, my village of Nkwen is fed by the cool, dry northeasterly winds rolling down across the savannah. It is here, among the Ngemba Tikari-speaking people, that I took my first breath of life. Right behind my grandmother's kitchen, it is here, behind her kitchen, that my umbilical cord was kept, closest to the evergreen and most fruitful plantain tree. It was a responsibility of my grandmother to ensure the tree was kept healthy and fresh through constant evening watering and palm oil anointing to invoke the blessings of our ancestors. This process continued until I was a month old. Born to a mother who was a farm owner and a father living abroad, my early childhood days were spent tending to the garden, playing with other children, and engaging in general mischief. Because my mother was always away on her farms, I was practically raised by my grandmother, a stern, no-nonsense matriarch with a soft side to her only I could unravel. Illiterate in the language of those who have been to school, the English language, my grandmother, utilizing our vernacular, schooled me at a very early age in the ways of a morally upright, humble, God-fearing young lady. I, my grandmother, and sometimes my mother would together attend church services on Sundays. During service, the two adults would sing, stamp their feet on the sun-baked earth in some kind of spiritual frenzy, while I, the child, would roam around playing hide and seek with other children in the community. It quickly came to the notice of my teachers during my elementary school years that I had a special knack for articulating both in the English language and my local dialect. This ability of mine placed me in a position where I was asked to represent my local community during times of annual competitions in the form of debates, storytelling, and reciting traditional folklore. Many a time I find myself in the midst of some serious local community debates and gossips. On one hand, some community members felt I was giving some undue advantages, having a hardworking father providing for me from abroad, and a grandmother who worked tirelessly to instill in me those positive values that would carry me through life. Others in the community felt some sort of collective community pride in having me as one of them, a child so fluent and knowledgeable in both the English language and the local dialect. I quickly grew to understand the little community was a microcosm of life in general. Those we interact with will always have different opinions about us, no matter how hard we try to stay balanced in our outlook. Today, I look back and miss all those I grew up with. I remember knowing the location of every house in my little community, everyone's parents, and which family owned which plot of farmland. I also remember being excited on days designated traditionally as country Sundays, for on these days, farming was forbidden. This used to give my friends and me time to eat, play, harvest fruits, and catch up with stories. I sometimes also miss the peace and quiet, the serenity of the environment, including the humility and love shared by a people who were predominantly farmers, hunters, and butchers. Though my people were illiterate, they took pride in their work and dedication, supporting each other in the understanding that when a single community member is paying, it could be lessened in the spirit of shared affection and support. My people consider the umbilical cord to be the essence of life. When a child is born, a process usually carried out by a traditional midwife, an elderly woman with years of experience in childbirth. The umbilical cord is cut, wrapped in dried palm leaves. The leaves are then smeared with powder and ceremoniously carried to the spot where it is to be buried. One of the reasons given for the burial of the umbilical cord when the child is born has to do with the strong cultural beliefs relating to fertility and healing. My people believe burying a child's umbilical cord helps the mother heal faster. Secondly, there is the belief that once the cord communicates with the spirit in ways that enhances the mother's fertility, enabling her to have many more children in future. History has thrust something upon me from which I cannot turn away. Tradition holds it that children will always return to their roots, no matter how far off they wander. This ensures the village, the community, constantly reaps loads of material benefits from their children after their sojourn to the wider world. Thank you.
This year's quote, "History has thrusted something upon me for which I cannot turn away," comes from the December 17th, 1959 Jet magazine interview called "Why Reverend M.L. King is Leaving Montgomery." This article gives a deep dive into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s reasoning to leave Montgomery, Alabama, and relocate his family and career to Atlanta, Georgia. I think it also shows a critical moment in Dr. King's life where he accepts his life's calling. Before the publication of this article, Dr. King's reputation for being a charismatic orator placed him in the position to be the elected president of a group of local ministers called the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA. As a young pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, Dr. King was assigned to collaborate with E.D. Nixon, president of the local National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and Joanne Robinson, a leader of the Women's Political Council, WPC. Dr. King became a part of the movement towards challenging segregation laws in the South. Building on the momentum created by the arrest of Miss Rosa Parks, the NAACP and WCP initiated a bus boycott on December 5th, 1955. Seeing the effects of the one-day boycott, Dr. King and MIA decided to help sustain the boycott and aid in any legal challenges faced by participants. Dr. King was assigned the task to mobilize people and be the spokesperson for the people's needs, which came with a great risk to himself and his family. From the publicity of the bus boycott, Dr. King became nationally recognized alongside Rosa Parks as the new face of the grassroots civil rights movement. In the article, Dr. King reflects on his experience during the bus boycott and states, quote, "For almost 4 years now, I have been faced with the responsibility of trying to do as one man what 5 or 6 people ought to be doing. This all began because of the injustices which we faced on the buses. I found myself in a position which I could not get out of," end quote. At the publication of this article, Dr. King was anonymously elected and offered the opportunity to be co-pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, alongside his father, Martin Luther King Sr. Reverend Dr. King Jr. was also nominated to be the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, which is an organization developed out of the efforts taken during the bus boycott. This was a natural progression for Dr. King because it gave him the ability to continue the civil rights efforts on a larger scale. The SCLC was created on January 10th through 11th, 1957, when 60 black ministers and civil rights leaders met in Atlanta, Georgia, in an effort to replicate the successful strategies and tactics of the recently concluded Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. The SCLC was dedicated to abolishing legalized segregation and ending the disenfranchisement of black Southerners in a non-violent manner. Later, SCLC would address the issues of war and poverty. In the article, Dr. King Jr. states, quote, "I have a sort of nagging consciousness that someone will interpret my leaving Montgomery as a retreat from the civil rights struggle. Actually, I will be involved in it on a larger scale. I cannot stop now. History has thrusted something upon me for which I cannot turn away." End quote. This article crystallizes the moment where Dr. King Jr. made the decision to accept the responsibility of a movement that changed the course of American and international history because of the bribes presented to him from alternative positions. Quote, "There had been numerous opportunities for retreat. From a white Montgomery leader had come and offered of a sizable sum of money to call off the 1956 bus boycott. From across the nation had come job offerings promising salaries from $10,000 to $15,000 yearly, and including the pastorships of an influential northern white church, professorships and deanships in a major white university. There still is the opportunity for Reverend King to earn more than $75,000 a year, he estimates, as a professional lecturer," end quote. Dr. King states, "It would have been a terrible letdown for trusting people all over the nation, people who have made me the symbol of the Negro stride towards freedom, if I had succumbed to the lure of money," end quote. Could this be the moment he refers to in his mountaintop speech on April 3rd, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, when he states, "I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind." The moment where he can see his true calling to the world, the moment where his purpose on this earth is shown to him, maybe. So I encourage everyone to follow Dr. King's lead. Follow your purpose and walk through the obstacles put in front of you, because history has thrusted something upon each one of us. We cannot, should not, and must not turn away.
Yes, let's give another hand and thank Basile Franks and all the people who participated in creating that. Here at the Big HCC, we like to put students first all time and in all ways. And I think you can see that through the offerings that the college has with the community. We continue to try to grow and be better and better at that. One of the best things about our connection with students and the way we like to take care of students and support them in all ways is our Dean of Students, Dr. Olgelati, and she is going to come up now and introduce the next segment of our program. So please welcome Dr. Christine Olgelati.
Good afternoon. I've had the pleasure of working with this planning committee for a while. Coordinating any program to do justice to the significance of Dr. King's legacy can be a daunting task. Doing so in a way that is meaningful to you, our audience, can also be challenging. Some years, the program has heavily focused on artistic performances with a speaker whose message spoke to celebrating diversity, but didn't always resonate with our daily experience or connect with our local history. A few years ago, our country reckoned with a renewed focus on the state of race relations and social justice, and during that time, so too did our MLK Planning Committee. We turned our focus inward. So too did the MLK Planning Committee. We also turned our focus toward our own community. In the few years since, we've sought to develop a program that continues to highlight artistic performances while more deeply honoring Dr. King's legacy by connecting to what is happening right here in our own backyard. We seek to keep the artistic portion alive through student performances. The timing of today's event has posed a challenge since we are currently between semesters. We are thankful to Larissa for sharing her reading and taking us on a special journey back to her homeland. We are appreciative to our graphic design students for their poster presentations encapsulating this year's program theme. To connect our program's central message to our community, our future presentations over the last few years have been focused on what is happening right here in Hagerstown, in our backyard. If you don't know, our beautiful community has a rich African American heritage. The Washington County Visitors Bureau says, quote, "From the earliest days of the 18th century, the lives, sacrifices, and contributions of African Americans have left an indelible impression on Washington County. We want to raise this awareness. The Dolman Black Heritage Museum is one of the top places that the Bureau recommends visiting and a key resource to deepen our community's rich African American heritage." I first met Ms. Wendy Perry, curator of the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, when she spoke at a Black History Month event in our Student Center last year. I was immediately inspired by the museum's humble origins. The museum's founding brought back fond childhood memories of my own grandmother, and as a child, looking through some of her keepsakes, just as Larissa's reading beckoned memories of her grandmother. In the case of the Dolmans, the power of one individual with a passion has become so much more, and it is inspiring. A few members of the MLK Planning Committee had the pleasure of visiting the museum in the spring, and it became immediately clear that the Dolman Black Heritage Museum is indeed one of Washington County's hidden gems, started by a humble dream, and today living out an exciting vision for the future. On behalf of the Planning Committee, we are pleased to share this gem with you today, and a gem that is right here in our own backyard, actually downtown. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Wendy Perry and Alicia Parson.
Well, good afternoon, all. I don't know if I'll need the mic, but I'll try to keep on task with this. When I read the theme of this year's Martin Luther King Jr.'s celebration, I was impacted really not just professionally, but also personally. I did not start off to be a museum curator. When I was going to school for my bachelor's degree, I was looking at being a fine artist and doing all the wonderful things like going to Paris to study and all things. My parents, who were paying for college, said, no, you're not getting a fine arts degree. So I had to switch it up and take a few computer science classes and ended up with a bachelor's in liberal studies, which I have to say has done me very much to my parents' glee that they told me so. When I did my master's degree, I did start off in the Master's of Public Administration. That was in the mid-1990s. And the reason that happened was there was not a museum studies program anywhere in the country. I was at the, in Illinois, Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. And fortunately for me, there was one of the best museums and archaeological gallery to be instated in actually the state of Illinois and probably the country. So I did get that kind of backdoor work with nonprofits as well as with museums. My first job started after an internship, and anyone that's doing any kind of studies should always, always look for an internship while you're still going to school. As I got through school, I realized that you can't always know everything from the books. You have to actually have your hands on. And my first job was as an archivist at the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis. Now, when I got that job, I didn't really know where it was going, where I was going to do, until a few years later when they hired me as a curator. Now, curators in this country are spread out all over the place, but they're a very close-knit group, and I was one of the first African-American curators in the country, and I'm very proud of that. But at the same time, it was difficult to really gauge how well you could do in that profession. So I kept going, and I kept going, and then I had an opportunity to come to Maryland, or back to Maryland, because my father lived here. And I basically came in to be the deputy director of the Banneker Douglas Museum, which is in Annapolis, Maryland. Now, that is the state museum for African American history and culture, and it's also tied to the Commission on African American History and Culture. So I sort of did both hats at the same time. But being there opened my eyes again to what it was really about being in a historical atmosphere. Like I said, this theme, history has thrust something upon me from which I cannot turn away. It became my mantra, really, for a long, long time, and continues to be. When I finally finished up the work for the $6 million renovation and expansion of Banneker Douglas, I got a call from Miss Alicia Parson McBean, and she was saying, we've got some grant money, you might want to come up here and check it out. Well, I had already been here once before, and that was by Miss Marguerite Dolman, the founder of the museum. It wasn't a museum per se, it was in her home, and she invited me and my director up to take a look at her collection. And I thought we were going to see a few things here and there. When you walked into that house, you were overwhelmed because every single place that there was space, she had some kind of figurine, she had some kind of historical reference. Her archives were incredible. You go down to the basement, there was all this other stuff down there, and then you went up to the second floor and to the attic, and she had stuff that she didn't even have out. And it was over 4,000 pieces. And she was looking at that time, from what I understood her, to be looking for a permanent location for the collection. But her stipulation was the collection had to go in full. And I was like, oh, Miss Marguerite, I don't think any museum will ever take over 4,000 pieces just automatically. I said, they'll probably cherry pick through it. She's like, yeah, that's what the Smithsonian told me too. I was like, well, you've heard it from the top. That's basically where you had to go to find out. And she said, well, I'm looking into making my own museum. I said, that's positive, that'll work. Unfortunately, she passed away after that meeting with her. And like I said, Alicia called me and said that, you know, they were going to the next level with their nonprofit. So I came up here to work a few grants and things like that. And I haven't left since 2010. So I've been here a good while. What I love about this collection, and like I said, I've had the other collection from the state, this collection is far more developed and encompassing of African American life and experience. The collection is overwhelming, and there is not a collection I know in the nation that could be any more complete and ever expanding as the ones she started collecting. When I came up, I started doing the inventory on pieces and collections and their condition and things like that. It still boggles my mind every time because some of the stuff is now at the museum, our temporary location, which is 3335 West Washington Street on the second floor, right across the street from the university, of course. So we've always had that kind of connection, and of course, we're building now a $23 million building that's going to be at the end of Jonathan Street. And Jonathan Street, if any of you don't know, is the historic African-American community for Hagerstown. There was of course, redlining going into effect, and that meant that was pretty much the only place African-Americans could live while living in the city of Hagerstown. I love the fact that this collection can be expanded. And I'm also overwhelmed with the fact that she was someone that was just collecting all on her own without any kind of formal education, and she by far topped anything that I would have come up with. Who thinks to collect the Wheaties boxes when the black athletes were coming back from the Olympics? Who does that? She did. Who collects RC Cola, which is, I don't even think they have RC Cola anymore. They had a series of, in the mid-'70s, cans with black baseball players on it. She collected not just one, not just two, but 3 or 4 of the cans for each player that was featured. So that's in the collection. She collected dolls. She collected African art. She was very, very based in the community of Hagerstown and Western Maryland. So the things are the archival things. She's got other family members and other families, papers, photographs, family Bibles, anything and everything that basically arose in Hagerstown, and she was collecting. So now here we are in 2023, and we're still collecting. The collection has expanded, of course, because it's not just about African Americans, it's about people of color, because that has basically expanded in the last few years to encompass more of the heritage and the history of anybody of color. The museum is very focused on making sure that we are collecting that way. One of the things that I did write when I first started was an idea of what the collection should be and would expand to be. And basically I found out, and here's one of my quotes that I had from my first go-round with research: African Americans in Maryland who have objects and materials important to the understanding of our local history are encouraged to consider donating these items to the Dolman Black Heritage Museum. There is a need to balance the historical interpretation of persons of color and to eliminate stereotypical notions that continue to prevail as truth about our lives. African Americans have made a much more broader and deeper contributions to American life than are often exhibited. The Dolman Black Heritage Museum is committed to preserving our culture and history of Western Maryland, and even some cases nationally. We are always asking people to consider us when they're going through their attics or their family's home base, or if parents have died or passed on. You know, don't throw anything away unless you call and ask me or ask anybody that is in the community that does collections. You never know what you have until somebody shows you how it can be interpreted. And nothing is too small. We have taken little figurines, we're taking dolls still to this day. We are taking anything and everything that basically reflects our history and our culture. And one of the things that I think that's most important is that we have our volunteers. The volunteers not only help with fundraising, they help man the museum in this temporary location, and will be much more relied upon when the museum opens down on Pennsylvania Avenue there at the end of Jonathan Street. Also, what we're looking for are people that are really into the project. Our project director, Alicia, will come up in a minute and give you the future of Dolman Black Heritage Museum. But I want to stress, most importantly, you never know what you have. You never know where your life is going to take you. Like Martin Luther King Jr. said, he was sort of thrust upon history, or history was thrust upon him. And once you pick it up, like me, you can't let it go. It's always going to be with you. Even as I get closer to retirement age, I will always be reading. I will always be researching. I will always be digging for the story, because that's basically what I do as a curator. I use the objects to tell stories, stories that usually are not voiced in a lot of institutions. I can vouch for that, being one of the curators at the Missouri Historical Society. You know, I had to fight a lot of times to get people of color involved in the institution and also with the exhibits. There wasn't anything ever going on in any country or any part of our world that didn't have a presence of African American and people of color. So that is very important that people continue to allow us to have our voice come into the song of what our life is going to be about. So I hope that you all are on board with that, whether you're a history major, whether you're nursing or anything. There is always a story to tell about people of color, and we have to make more of an effort every day, even now, more importantly, to make sure those voices are heard. So I'm going to introduce our project director, Elisa Parsons McBean. She was the one that got me up here. She is our driving force. She is a major hurricane of getting things done. She has made me better on my game, on professionally and personally. And I love that I can call her my friend, my sister, and the real spoke artist that she is when it comes to making sure this dream of Marguerite and Charles, her husband Dolman's, idea of what they thought the collection should be. So please welcome that for Elisa to come on up, and I will get out of your way. And we'll be around, so ask me questions later.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I sat there and I heard everyone speak, and I realized something about myself. So I'm going to roll this off, although maybe not so quickly, but because I want you all to hear it. I am Alicia Parson McBean. I am a native of Hagerstown. I first come here to thank you all for allowing us this opportunity to share with you all our story. I am also the daughter of two ministers, Pentecostal ministers at that. So speaking is not that difficult for me because of that reason. I am also a native of Hagerstown, Jonathan Street, born and raised. I am a product of the Dolman Black Heritage Museum because, like it or not, when I was a kid, we had to go annually. Yeah. Most of the time, I did not like it. However, I did not know that I would be doing this in the future. Then I came to HCC. I was taught by these professors and these instructors here who, there were those who saw me and there was those who didn't. Thank you for seeing me. Dr. Parsons back there, thank you for seeing me. I was not the athlete that my sisters were. My brother was, who played here. My brother did. My sister played at WVU. But when I came through here, there was a sense of community. There was a sense of, we will get you there, because I was a little rebellious. But there was a sense of, we're going to do these things because we know what you come from. And when I say come from, it was those parents who were not from here, who came here and made a way for themselves within this community. And if you're an outsider from Hagerstown, you know how difficult that is. But my parents were able to do that, and they were able to show us that we too had a responsibility to society. But more importantly, for me, it would turn out to be to Hagerstown and the Jonathan Street community. I say that because it was, this quote here means the world to me, and I'll explain why. History has thrust something upon me from which I cannot turn away. In 2003, the elders of the Jonathan Street community came to me and said, they called me by my nickname, which, Mr. Harsh, thank you. He whispered that in my ear when I was coming up. But they called me up and they said, we need someone to run for city government, and we think you're it. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not it. And Mr. Bill Mason, if any of you all know him, knew him, and he started this with me, and every time I saw him, he would say, it's time. And I would say no. At the time, I had taken, if you notice in the Herald Mail, they used to have these around Jonathan Street, around South End, around East End, around West End. And so I had taken this job with them to write hours, but I refused to do it like everyone else. I needed to make certain that my community make certain that they knew that we had more similarities than differences. So I wanted to write the stories of my childhood, being raised in Washington County and in Hagerstown. And so when I started writing those things, and I would tell them what was going to be coming up in the community, but I had to make certain that they understood and that they saw us, the Jonathan Street community. My first question was, okay, you have an around North, South, East, and West End. Why do you need an around Jonathan Street? Jonathan Street is northwest centrally located in Hagerstown. So it's a part of the North End, it's a part of the West End. However, it's Jonathan Street. Redlining made it that it's where the minorities of the community lived. So I decided that I needed to write these stories. One of the most favorite stories was Christmas at the Parson House. It always ended with a Scrabble game, and we all would viciously competitive in our house. So the community started to see me more as just any kid in the community or any young adult in the community. And so when the elders came to me and asked me to run, they were doing this based on the popularity of that article that I was writing in the paper. And after a year, they wore me down. And Mr. Mason truly didn't play fair with this. He then got Miss Ruth Monroe. She was the leader of the Memorial Recreation Center at the time, and a very, very close personal friend to me and my family. So when he solicited her to tell me what I need to do, I just one day said, okay. I started out here at HCC as a political science major and realized that I don't want to do that. So my only introduction to politics was every day, every evening watching the news with my dad. I jokingly tell people that my first crush was Walter Cronkite. And I was there, you know? So understanding and knowing the dynamics of the Black culture and the Black community, this is what this statement means to me. There is something thrust upon me that I can't let go, that I have to stick it out to the end. Fast forward, I get elected, I do one term, and in the midst of that, I was helping the Dolman family because Mrs. Dolman had passed, and subsequently Mr. Dolman passed, but before he passed, me and his granddaughter were here at HCC. They had some, I can't even remember what it was, but we were showcasing some of the artifacts at one of their expos here. And we get back to his house to unload everything that we had taken from the house to bring out here to show. And he sits there and he says, "Parson." Most of the elders call me one of those Parson girls or Parson. He says, "Parson, I need you to make me a promise." And I said, "Mr. Dolman, anything for you," because he's a wonderful man. He said, I need you to promise me that you will help my family get this collection into a museum in full tact." So that's what Wendy was speaking of when she said that Mrs. Dolman wanted it all to stay together. Now, you cannot imagine what 4,500 pieces of artifacts looks like unless you saw it in that living museum in their home and how it was displayed. It was displayed with the utmost respect to the Black experience in America, something that we pray to God that we can duplicate with the museum that we're about to build. So that's how I got here. I made that promise to him. I get out of office and I'm wondering, what am I gonna do next? See, because I didn't ask to do that other thing. You understand? I did not ask to do that other thing. But then while I was in office, the son and the daughter of Charles and Marguerite Dolman came in and said, "Alicia, our father told us about the promise that you made him, and now you are in a position to help, or at least hear what we'd like to do." And what they wanted to do was start a nonprofit organization. Well, that's easy. I called our family attorney and I said, "The Dolman family needs you to create this nonprofit entity." So they go and they do that. And then the city of Hagerstown had the collection assessed for its museum quality. That was the next thing that would happen. Then we found a building in 2008, had it assessed for it to become a museum. That year, we went into negotiations for that building, and the negotiations fell through. But little did we know that in 2018, that building would come up for sale again. And now I'm just tired. You know, I'm like, at this point, I'm like, all this, we are getting this building. And on June 19th of 2019, we got that building. We got a loan from the city to purchase the building, and we now own that building. We have a handout of what the future of the Dolman Black Heritage Museum is to be. It is more than just a $23 million project in the Jonathan Street community, in that corridor where they have not seen an economic development project outside of public housing. So we are doing this economic development project with a price tag of $23 million, and Alicia is tired. And so I'm trying with all in my might to get a second wind to be excited, and then Miss Christina comes to see us and she says, "We're doing this program," and I told her my feelings about this particular program not actually resonating with me, and then she tells me about this Martin Luther King quote, and I was like, okay, now she's got me. I was supposed to be away this week, but changed that around just so that I could do this, because I think people need to understand that when you are a community, there are things that happen to you that are historical, and they drive you to become who you are to become. I stand here as the projects director for the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, not because it was something I wanted to do. It's because I made a promise. I also made a promise to Miss Ruth Monroe. I'm falling very short on that one. However, we'll get there. We will figure that out as well. Being a product of this museum, first thing I said to Wendy when she came up to help us with the first grant that we received that was for building capacity for the organization, one day she was going through all the documents, and the documents are not considered a part of the 4,500 piece collection. The documents are another 4,000 to 5,000 pieces of literal documents that tells the story of the Jonathan Street community and the blacks of Hagerstown and Washington County and its surrounding area. Because one thing that we do know is that the Dolman family itself is far more than Washington County. There was the one family of the Dolman family that is celebrated out at St. Mark's on Lappins Road because they were allowed to go to church there during slavery. And then once they left for their freedom in Pennsylvania, correct? In Pennsylvania, they came back after the Emancipation Proclamation. So we are partnering with other jurisdictions in our surrounding area to have them as satellites of the Dolman Black Heritage Museum. But again, $23 million for this building that we're doing here in Hagerstown. And this building is not just to house this collection. This building will tell the story of our community, our existence in America. There, we will be coming out with a booklet that tells you what everything associated with that building means. It's heavily weighted in metaphors, from the transatlantic slave trade to the masking of our people during wedding receptions so that we did not die during slavery. So those are the things that I am bringing to the table for our community, that we are bringing to the table for our community. It has not been easy. It has not been easy. There have been naysayers, and there have been haters, downright haters, who would tell lies to stop this progress. But it doesn't happen. It has not happened. It will not happen because, again, I didn't ask to do this. I was called to do this. I answered that call, and I kept a promise, and I'm going to continue to do that. So how does one help us? Well, Ms. Perry has covered our volunteer needs. We are in communications with the community college and the university systems and Shepherd and Shenandoah to find any interns that want to come there. However, our internships are not, even though they will cover business, social services or social studies, and history, it will also teach you while you're there how to advocate for a minority nonprofit in a world today. So you will learn the social responsibilities of self. How do we go out there and how do we encourage people not only to not be racist, but to also see themselves within our community as well? So we are very hopeful for that. We also want to put a state-of-the-art studio in there so that we can help the community college and anyone else who wants to offer communications, because we find that kids of color love to do things like rap and things of that nature. And so we're going to put that studio in there so that HCC and university systems can use our studio for their communications classes, so that we can do things like allow our kids something else to do other than, while they're waiting on the Robert W. Johnson Community Center to reopen, they will have other things that they can do that they also like, because we've heard them telling us what they want. So all of that is going to be in that building. We don't have to worry about a revenue stream because we're building that into our building. With the Coca-Cola portion of it will become a cafe. So we don't have to worry. We're not, once we get to 23 million, we will have a sustaining cash flow to keep the doors open. So if you want to become a member of our Friends of the Dolman Black Heritage Museum group, it's as simple as calling down to the museum and getting your name put on their list. Their number is 301-797-5019. That's for volunteerism. If you'd like to make a donation, you can go on our website, which is DolemanBlackHeritageMuseum.org. Go to their support page, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and hit donations. If you'd like to help us with, the Dolman Black Heritage Museum takes their role very seriously in that they introduce a Juneteenth celebration in Hagerstown for the first time in 2021. Yes, 2021. Thanks to the city, the county, and several businesses within the community that supported that. We had our second year last year, and we'll do it again this year. So if you want to be a part of that planning committee, we will be meeting on February 15th at the museum at, I believe it's 2 p.m. But call first, and we can get your name on there. So we have who we are, how we ended up here. We have how you can get a hold of us. I do have some handouts of the future home. I also have a magnetic bumper sticker, but I ask if you are not going to use it on your bumper to please not take it because I only have a few. In the future, you can come to the museum and get one for your refrigerator. But right now, I'm on this goal to see how many cars I pass in Hagerstown that has this bumper sticker on it. So having said all that, I think I covered everything that you needed me to cover. I want to say thank you once again. It's a pleasure to see many of the faces that I'm seeing here. And I'm going to take my seat right now and wait for Pastor Mency to wow us. Thank you all.
I know that anytime I would be involved in a project, I'd want the kind of spirit and strength of these two fantastic women. Let's give them another hand. So before we get to the highlight capstone of this event every year, I do have a couple of things I want to say. On behalf of the college, we want to thank our student graphic design students. Posters out in the lobby on your program, we've listed their names. We want to acknowledge their hard work and their artistic ability and being a part of this history today. There's an event coming up here that I want you to be aware of. On March 23rd, and you'll see a lot of advertisement about this, the college has adopted the idea of taking a book every year and then incorporating it in all aspects of college life for our students, our faculty, and our community. This is a book called Walking to Listen. And it was discovered that the author's name is Andrew. One of the places that he walks and listens is through Selma, Alabama. And in Selma, he recorded more interviews than anywhere else across the country. And of his time in Selma, Andrew wrote, "Alabama made my head swirl. The hatred, the kindness, the separation, the interdependence, the complete lack of resolution. I was walking through a land imbued with pain." He went on further and said, "I walked to Selma from Montgomery, tracing the same path that Dr. King and hundreds of others walked on in 1965 in nonviolent protest of institutionalized racism. Underneath that, in recognition of the truth that we're all human, equal, needed, walking the path in reverse, imagining them all together, seeing where they slept at night, where one of them was murdered by the KKK on the side of the highway. It had the effect of making it all real for me. My body was where their bodies had been. And when I got to Selma, my body was in the jail cell where Dr. King's body had been, and in Brown Chapel, where the bodies began their march. It was like I could hear their voices. Many of the people were alive during the civil rights movement, were still alive when I passed through Selma, and I got to listen to them. Andrew will be here in March on the 23rd, and we certainly would invite you to come and hear more about his events and what he gathered in walking to listen. We have truly the spirit and the strength of Dr. King with us today, embodied in my, I can now say, good friend, and one day every year, my pastor. I asked him for a blessing earlier, and I can feel it already. So please join with me in welcoming Reverend Darin Mency. Reverend.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here again. Just so thankful and humbled that the institution of higher learning, Hagerstown Community College, continues to ask me to return. I must start my thank yous with Dr. Christine Ojolati, who reaches out to me and secures the date. I want to thank you for trusting the release of this iconic work year after year. I want to thank Professor Harsh. I want to thank Dr. Warner and Dr. James Dauber. I believe I got the names right. Professor Parsons, who embraces me every year. And I don't see County Commissioner Klein, but he was here. And I ran into him not that long ago, and he says, I'm looking forward to seeing you real soon. To all of you, I'll consider you dignitaries, so to all the dignitaries, to all the staff and faculty, to the students, thank you. I'm here to take you back to embrace a historical moment in America's history. A hot day, a Wednesday afternoon on August 28th, 1963, in our nation's capital. And I like to take you on a journey. I am not Dr. King, but I will do my best to bring to you a dramatic rendition of the speech. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and by the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of our nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit paths of racial justice. Now is the time to lift this nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of this nation until the bright day of justice emerges. There is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they've come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways or the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied and will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. I am not unmindful, though, that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom has left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. So go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and the ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering in the heat of injustice and sweltering in the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with his vicious racists, with his governor having his lips dripping in the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places shall be made plains, and the crooked places shall be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, that all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with this faith. We will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee, from every mountainside, from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Thank you, Reverend Mency, and we'd like to invite you all to join Reverend